Good morning. How are we this morning? You good? Who's excited about Christmas? Yes, I'm so excited about Christmas. I had so much fun at our first caroling thing in the mall. Now, you may have seen photos on Facebook, but I got to wear this costume called Shieldy, which is like a Salvation Army shield, and it's got arms and legs, and it was like the funnest night ever. It was so great, but we did get to talk to lots of different people passing by, so please come and join us over the next couple of weeks at our caroling stuff. And we had our first kettle spot yesterday, which I heard was very busy and exciting and fun, so sign up for that as well. It's pretty exciting. So I hope that you're excited about Christmas, and I especially hope that you're excited about this Christmas series that we're doing in church. And certainly for me, looking at this Christmas story through the lens of this verse in Isaiah has offered a new perspective for me, and I love that. So last week, Rebecca introduced our series, and she talked a little bit about the process of naming a child. So I thought I'm going to go back and have a look a little bit about what my name means. And I found out that Sarah is a pretty old name, right? It's the 8th oldest name in the history of womankind. And do you know what it means? You probably do, Mum, but that's all right. It means princess, which is just hilarious, because if you've spent any more than about 5 minutes with me, you'll know that I'm like the least most gracious person ever. So I'm sorry, Mum and Dad, it was certainly not a prophecy over who I would become. I hope you weren't hoping in that. But unlike my name, this verse from Isaiah is a prophecy for who this child, who this light in the darkness would become. If you want to turn with me once again, just to refresh your memory, we've read it a couple of times this morning from Isaiah 9:6, which says, For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, he will be called Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. So last week we considered the first one of these 4 names that was promised to us. He'll be called Wonderful Counselor. And Rebecca reminded us through the story of Midian that God's strategies are not always the same as our strategies. And this week we're talking about this baby who comes in human form and will be called Mighty God. So I want to tell you a little bit about this name. This name, Mighty God, in Hebrew, I think it's going to come up, is El Gibor. Do you want to say that? It's kind of fun. Good. I think that's right. I don't know. This word, Gibor, it was a name that was often used to describe heroes or warriors. It's a word that reveals a brave, courageous champion. So when it's combined with El, it describes this mighty power that can only be found in a deity. So by calling Jesus Mighty God, he's set apart from all other powers. His power is far superior to anyone else. In fact, you might have heard God being described before as omnipotent. And this comes from a Latin word, a Latin compound of omni, which means all, and then potens, which means power. So this word, this description of God implies that he has unlimited power. And it's an interesting name to give a baby, right? But that's who this promised child would become. So this morning we're just going to spend some time talking about the power of this mighty God and how Jesus' power, though it's not always seen how we expect it, it should change the way that we live. And you know, for me, there's times when I fully feel like I experience God's power. And for me, most of the time, it's when I'm out in nature. I almost struggle to see how someone could not believe in something greater that created our universe. And you know, I was in Hawaii a couple of weeks ago. And has anyone ever been to Hawaii? Yeah. If you've been to Hawaii, you'll know that it just has the most incredible landscape. The mountains and the ocean. And I just had so many moments, you know, when we went for a walk. Actually, I don't really say the word it's more like, this is the best. But I just had so many moments like that. So I thought, just so you catch on the vibe of our all-powerful God, I better show you some pictures this morning. So the first one, this is the first one. You can see it kind of looks like I'm hanging dangerously. My mum was a bit concerned, but it's really not that dangerous. It's just the angle, so thanks, Rebecca. But you can see out onto the ocean, and then you turned around and there was mountains behind us. It was amazing. And then the next one, that's on a zip line. So I was kind of hanging and soaring through the trees. It was very, very cool. Next one. This is on a big crater that we climbed called Cocoa Head, and it just had the most amazing views. I love the mountains there. It was just amazing. And the next one, that's on Waikiki Beach, and you can see like it's kind of a bit more commercial, but then you can see out onto Diamond Head there, and that's us on a stand-up paddleboard. Rebecca made me push her the whole time, like, what the heck, trying to go on a holiday, and she's still bossing me around. Oh, and that's just a picture of cheesecake, because I missed cheesecake and it was so good. But anyway, in these moments, you can take the cheesecake off, it really wasn't hard for me to agree with the prophet Isaiah, who wrote, Sovereign Lord, you have made the heavens and the earth by your great power and your outstretched arm. Nothing is too hard for you. And now, admittedly, I was pretty buzzed when we were in Hawaii, so it didn't take much for me to think nothing is too hard for my God. But you know, I see it here too when I walk out on the beach here, when I climb Sublime Point. Any time that I'm in nature, I just have this real sense and this awe of God's power. Can anyone identify with that? I don't know what it is for you. Maybe it's building something or making something. Maybe it's when you go for a run or when you pray or when you're worshipping God. But there's a lot of times in my life where it's not hard at all for me to claim God's power, to sense his power. And it's really easy for me in those moments to trust and rely on this omnipotent God. But you know, there's also a lot of times where, to be honest, I just don't see it. There have been so many times in my life when I've thought to myself, God, where is your power? Times when I've been suffering or the people around me have been suffering. I watch the news and I see what's going on in the world and I think, God, where is your power in that? And I pray for something to happen and I wait for it and I think, God, if you're all powerful, why can't you do this for me? And you know, I kind of came crashing back to reality this week as I came back to work, and we've just been totally overwhelmed by the amount of people that are coming in seeking our assistance over Christmas time, that are just in desperate situations. And you know, I sat with this one couple this week and I helped them fill out some forms, and they shared a little bit about what was going on with them, and my heart just broke for them. But as I filled out more of their forms, I realised that they were younger than I was. These two people in this desperate situation, they'd lost jobs, they'd had medical stuff going on, and I couldn't help but think to myself, God, where's your power in that? And I'm sure many of us have either observed or been in a situation where we maybe question where God's power is because it isn't revealed to us in the way that we kind of expect that it should be. But as much as we question it and as much as it's sometimes hard for us to see, I just want to say this morning that God's power is real. It's alive and it's working for us. Sometimes it's just not revealed in the way that we expect. And I think that we're shown this in the promise of a child who would be called Mighty God. See, he was all powerful. He could have come in any way, but he chose to come as this child, weak, vulnerable. He experienced our emotions. He was tried and tested, yet he was mighty. So we're going to take a look this morning at a psalm that we often turn to in times when it's difficult for us to see God's power at work. It's a psalm that I love, that we often look for comfort and assurance. And it's a reminder to us that he is omnipotent and that his power is real. So if you will, I would love it if you would turn with me this morning to Psalm 91. And I'm going to read from verse 1, so Psalm 91. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. Surely he will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampant. You will not fear the terror of the night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. You will only observe with your eyes and see the punishment of the wicked. If you say, the Lord is my refuge, and if you make the Most High your dwelling, no harm will overtake you. No disaster will come near your tent, for he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. They will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. You will tread on the lion and the cobra. You will trample the great lion and the serpent. Because he loves me, says the Lord, I will rescue him. I will protect him, for he acknowledges my name. He will call on me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. With long life, I will satisfy him and show him my salvation. His power, it protects us, it shelters us, it rescues us. His power isn't to magically grant all our wishes, to give us what we want. It's to save us from ultimate defeat. God's people had access to this power, and now we're promised this same power through Jesus. And I just want to spend some time this morning identifying 3 ways that Jesus' power is at work. 3 ways that some of us just might need some reminding of this morning, so that we can see that this mighty God is at work even when his power might not work in the way that we expect that it should. So the first point this morning is this. Number 1, Jesus' power is at work in you. Philippians 2:13 tells us that God is working in you, giving you the desire and power to do what pleases him. So his mighty power is at work in us. Now, I read this story this week of a pastor who talked about how he thought God's power worked when he first became a Christian. See, this guy thought that God's power was all about him, to make his life easy, to take his problems away. So he went down to a newsagent one day and he bought a lotto ticket. And he prayed, God, if you are all powerful and you can do anything, give me the numbers so that I win. I'll even go halvesies with you, okay? I'll retire and I'll give some money to your church, we'll all win. So he fills out his card, prays this prayer, and guess what happened? He didn't win. He didn't get the numbers right. Because that's not what trusting in an all-powerful God is about. God's power isn't to make life easy, it's to change us. Jesus' power in us takes us from being selfish and self-centered and sinful. And it takes us to being people that are Christ-like, who show love, compassion, peace, patience, gentleness, and self-control. You see, God's power is real. We just don't always see it as it works in us. And if we go back to Psalm 91, we see exactly who it is that God's power is working in and protecting. It's those who dwell. It's those who allow his power to work in him. The psalm starts off by telling us that whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. Then verse 9 says, if you say, the Lord is my refuge, and you make the Most High your dwelling, no harm will overtake you. See, dwelling meant more than just sitting in the temple. It implied someone who was living in consistent relationship or consistent worship of the King. And a person that dwelt there, a person that dwells with God, it's a person that's at home in Christ. If we want Jesus' power to work in us, then we have to be people that dwell with him. Jesus' power is revealed as he changes who we are. And the more our lives dwell with God, the more we begin to change. And I would assume that for many of you, that you've been on this journey for a long time, you must have experienced God's power in you, changing you, because I'm not really sure why you'd still be here if you hadn't. It happens all the time, but I think it's a power that can be very easily overlooked. So this Christmas, I want to encourage you that if you want to experience something of Jesus' power, then perhaps the best place to start is allowing his power to work in you. I'm going to dwell with you, God. I'm going to be consistent in my time spent with you so that your power can work in me, changing me, molding me, shaping me to be more and more like your Son. And I know that we harp on about this all the time, but if you're at a point where maybe you're not spending time regularly, daily, reading the Word and praying, it's time to pick it up again. If you're asking God where his power's at, start by making room to allow that power to work in you, to dwell in him. So Jesus' power, it's at work in us, and it's also at work for us. Point number 2, Jesus' power is at work for you. Isaiah 40:29-31 says he gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. See, maybe at Christmas time, this might kind of hit home for us, where we're tired, we're weary, Maybe it took everything in you just to get out of bed and to come to church this morning. Maybe you've got problems and you feel weak and defeated. And the good news is this morning that God gives strength to the weary and he increases the power of the weak. And as we look at Psalm 91, it tells us that he will save us, that he will cover us, he will protect us, he'll guard us, and he'll be with us. And God is for his people. He was for them then and he's for us now. And his power is best when we are weak, because that's when it comes through for us, when we're fully reliant on his power and not on ourselves. And I know what you're thinking, because I kind of thought it as I wrote this, that this is a very, very easy point to say. It's reassuring for us to read in the psalm, for sure. But what about when I feel like God's power isn't working for me? When someone in my family gets a bad diagnosis, when I've gone months without work, when I'm feeling crippled by fear or anxiety, it's pretty hard to feel like God is protecting me and covering me and guiding me. And that's a valid way to feel. But I think the power of our mighty God is not seen necessarily in what he can do for us like we often expect that it should be. His true power is seen as he makes us strong in our weakness. When we're weak, we can be strong because Jesus' power is working for us. So if we allow his power to work in us, and we know that he's working for us, we can then allow him to work through us. And that's my last point this morning, that Jesus' power is at work through you. See, the Apostle Paul writes in his letters to the Corinthians, "My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith may not rest on men's wisdom, but on God's power." See, our lives should be a demonstration of the Spirit's power. And sometimes the Spirit works through us. This power works through us in physical ways. We might be prompted to pray for someone, for healing, for example. And one of my favourite stories about that is actually Connor's story. When he was young, his eardrum collapsed and he wasn't doing so good, and he went to a music camp, and a couple of the leaders found out what was going on with him, and so they asked him if they could pray for him. And a couple of them put their hand on his ear, and he'll tell you that as they prayed, it felt hot. And he was so convinced after this prayer that he was healed, and he went to the doctors, and they told him that it had reinflated by 98%. It's a crazy miracle that happened through these guys' obedience, physically going to Connor and saying, we want God's power to work through us, to minister to you. And that story has been shared, and God's power has been seen through that. So we might do something that we thought was impossible with God and allow him to work through us in that way. And that's amazing when that happens. But actually, most importantly, I think Jesus' power works through us as we allow it to work in and for us. So we need the first two first. Because if I'm making the Most High my dwelling, if I'm allowing his power to change me, to work on my behalf when I'm weak and incapable, his power is demonstrated to the people around me. I actually don't have to try and convince people that I follow Jesus with wise words if my life looks something like Christ's. See, Jesus' power works through us so that other people can see him. Our lives are not a description, but a demonstration of his power. So Jesus' power, it works in us, it's working for us, and it's working through us. And I hope this morning that you realise that this helpless little baby in the manger was really the mighty God, the all-powerful God. Little hands were the same ones that put those stars in place. This carpenter who lived his life building chairs and tables while he was growing up was the same one that fashioned human beings and the universe. The God of justice who wanted to punish sin. He was the one who allowed himself to be hung on a cross so that he might satisfy those demands of justice. And I think he understands the difficulty that we face sometimes as we question God's power in our circumstances. We know that as he hung on the cross, as Jesus hung on the cross, he cried out, "Why have you forsaken me?" And in that moment, I'm sure that he would have thought, "God, where is your power in this?" But of course, we see that the greatest demonstration of God's power is through this situation. So though we might not understand it always, his power is real. His power works in us. It's at work for us and it's working through us. So this morning, we're just going to spend some time singing this powerful song that acknowledges a God who can do all things, whose power is bigger than our understanding. And I just want you to spend some time this morning praying and asking him to reveal that power to you once again, even if it's not in the way that you expect. Maybe you need to recommit to dwelling with him so that you can allow his power to work in you. Maybe you're going through some tough stuff at the moment. You're struggling to see how God could possibly be for you. You need a reminder that he is. Maybe some of us need to be more aware of God's power working through us and be confident enough in him to be obedient when he calls or to simply live out the example that he sets. So as we sing, if you'd like to come and pray, but I encourage you just to reflect, to ask Jesus to reveal his power to you this morning. Let's sing.